All right, team, we're back with the next Mad Science Meets Real Life, and Iñaki is back fresh from the race course, in need of a bit of recovery, right, Iñaki?
I don't know if I'm still fresh, but I'm freshening up after kicking myself for not only the Ironman but all the entire block before Ironman. That maybe we'll get into this. That the training, not only the racing, is what really gets you tired, right? But yes, I'm in that process now.
So yeah, we've timed this episode on all of the nuances of recovery just right, because we've got our guinea pig who's going to tell us what he's feeling, what the real life aspect of recovery is, and I'll geek out a bit more on some of the hormonal aspects and the nervous system aspects and stuff like that. So yeah, I think this is going to be an important one because as Iñaki and I were talking before we came on, there's a lot of athletes who sort of obsess over the work aspect, but then don't really give a lot of thought to the process of recovery, other than, well, I'm going to stop the work and then I'm going to magically recover. But, there's a lot more to it than that. And, I think this is going to be a really important one for the listeners, just to get a bit more of a process on the active element of recovery, and not just the stopping of training and the time in between your training, because there's a lot we can do to accelerate that, and we'll go into some of those things in this episode. So yeah, I guess the kind of the tagline that Iñaki came up with, and I think it's a good one, is that recovery is the forgotten discipline. So you want to kind of go into where your head is in coming up with that, Iñaki?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've seen myself when I started. I didn't understood this when I get into the sport, but when I started coaching people as well, and when I was especially an elite, I could not really wrap my head around the idea of recovery is also training, right? So it's not recovery is not doing nothing. That would be a fallacy. I think the really important thing about recovery is discipline, is routine. It's not a break of doing nothing, right? If you would ask me what I think is recovery, is about doing the right thing at the right time. So you can't grow if you don't recover. So there has to be a process for you in order to recover properly. Because if you stop and do nothing, which is what many people do, they get fat, they stop exercising at all, they go from like 12 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours a week, consistently building, for example, for their Ironman. And then Ironman is over and they're like, I'm going to take 3, 4, 6 weeks off. And it completely shuts the shop down. And I think that's a mistake. Not only after racing and closing the season, but also I would really like to get into the what happens in between, because sometimes we think about recovery as punishment, especially if we really like to do the work. But just setting up the tone, Alan, I think recovery is training, and probably you can tell us more about what's actually happening when recovery is working, right? What's happening at body level.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to kind of keep in mind, and something that anyone who's read any sort of exercise physiology book has come across at some point, is Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome, right? So you got this standard picture that's in every exercise physiology text, where there's a stressor that's applied, and when the stress is applied, initially the athlete's capacity goes down as they're tired, and then over time their capacity starts to come back up, right? And eventually you reach a point where supercompensation occurs and capacity is greater than what it was at the starting point. And if you look at that picture, the time scale of the stressor being applied is like a tiny little bit, right? It's the first 5%, 10% of that picture. And the rest of it, like 90%, is in what happens after the stress is applied and how quickly the athlete's able to get to that point where they're fitter, where they're super compensating. So I think a lot of times we forget about that fact, and we forget about the fact that you can apply exactly the same stressor to two different athletes, but because they do different things in their recovery period, one of them is going to take a really, really long time to get to that super compensation point, whereas the other one who recovers well is going to get there much quicker. And because these are stacked over time, right? Every session is an opportunity for this adaptation curve to occur. The differences can be huge between an athlete who really pays attention to their recovery and an athlete who doesn't. And we see that when we look at differences in training response. There's massive differences in training response between athletes. And I think a lot comes down to just that, that you've got athletes who pay attention to how quickly they're getting back to that super compensation. And you get some athletes who aren't paying attention to that, who are just winging it. And, whenever they're ready for the next session, they're ready for the next session.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to my head because in the Substack that I wrote precisely about this, it's the typical example of, one athlete recovers in 7 days, the other from the same workload, and the other one recovers in 14 days, right? Who will be fitter at the end of the year? Well, the guy who is recovering faster, right? Because he can eventually train more. So if you multiply this by 5 seasons, that's an enormous amount of weeks of training that one can do against the other. So actually in a 5 week period we are talking about 7 weeks of difference of real training, which this is absolutely massive. And I think we tend to underestimate the benefit of this compounding, right, in actually recovering, because we can also think it this way, Alan, like a recovery debt, right? So if we have a debt that is tangible, like, okay, I did, a training block. Let's not talk about racing. I did a typical 1, 2, 3 weeks build, and I feel amazing by the end of third week. And I'm like, I will keep this rolling for another 2 weeks, which is common in many athletes. They want to stack up big weeks and keep adding load because they are feeling good. And this is the problem. You need to really understand that you invested a lot of, let's put it in terms of work, kilojoules or kilocalories into this almost month of work. And if you don't take it out, that debt will eventually finish the amount of energy, either mental or physical, that you have to keep doing the work. So before you finish it completely, you maybe back off, rebuild it, and then move on. And I think I had this conversation actually today with a super high level cyclist at regional level that I'm coaching here. And he was like, oh man, I think we are under training, I'm like, no man, you are under recovering. Like, look at what you are doing. Like, you are finishing his training almost 30 hours a week. And this is, and he has his own business. I'm like, man, maybe we really need to scale down. It's almost end of the season. Like, you need to understand where we are. You did an amazing season. You win a lot of races. Like, we really need to step back and you need to see the bigger picture. And most people will say that they are under training, and the actual thing that they are doing is under recovering. But I don't know, how does the body actually, and this is with real measurements, how to track this, Alan? What are the deeper signals? Because it's very difficult for a highly motivated athlete, unless you get sick or you get something like that absolutely stops you. What are the deeper signals that basically the deeper signals that the athletes are missing? What are those signals?
Yeah, I think you hit on an important point, in terms of kind of debt accumulating. And the first and I think the most important signal that a lot of athletes don't pay attention to is, am I getting better? Am I actually hitting that super compensation point where over the course of training blocks, I see my numbers getting better. And you see a lot of athletes who they pay attention to the inputs, but they don't really pay a lot of attention to the outputs. They're maybe not testing as frequently as they should be testing, or they're not testing in a disciplined way, where they have a particular test that they do, a particular structure, and they're repeating that frequently enough to be able to tell if the load is working for them. So I think that's the first and most important one. You want to make sure that you are getting to that super compensation point in the cycle, and you're not just continually digging the hole deeper and deeper and deeper with each successive training block. And beyond that, I think that the way that athletes are able to get to that super compensation point is they have to be able to flip the switch of their body into that recovery mode. So they have to be able to get out of that point where they're in high stress mode and applying the stressor. And then they have to be able to flip the switch to where their body actually is able to recover quickly from the stress. And one thing that I'm obviously a big fan of in assessing how well they're able to do that is looking at heart rate variability. And that's something that I know you've tracked over the years for many many years now, and something that you've got good numbers on, and from an objective standpoint, I think that's a really useful thing to look at, because it gives us a direct window into what the athlete's nervous system is doing, and whether they're in the nervous system mode of let's generate energy and do as much work as possible, or whether they've flipped the switch to the mode of we've done the work, now we need to recover from the work.
And just to zoom in before we move on in the measuring of the recovery, because I think it's very important, and the data and also the subjective measurements, Alan, comes to my mind. You mentioned testing, and it can be testing or racing, but let's focus on testing on the blocks. When I talk to athletes and actually the community in general, they're super focused on, okay, this year I will do 10,000 kilometers in the bike. I will increase 2 hours the weekly training load. And they're thinking just how to do more work, right? And I'm always telling them, and how would you know if you are actually improving? And they always answer, if I have better races. And I'm like, I think that's completely wrong, because racing is one time, maybe two, maybe three, maybe five, maybe six, maybe 10 times in the year. How many times you can test if what you are doing is moving you in the right direction? Oh, but that's expensive, the lactate or the laboratory. I'm like, no, those are some of the most gold standard testing that I like to use, and that I recommend to use. But there is also aerobic benchmarking and simple methods. So maybe you want to zoom in a little bit more on the importance of testing regularly, not necessarily on race day, because again, race can go good or wrong for many, many reasons, and we can't blame fitness. And I think that's actually counterproductive to yourself and your self-confidence and the work you put, because that keeps compounding over time. It doesn't go away because you had a bad race. But what goes completely to trash is you don't have an actual benchmark of what you did if you don't test frequently. So maybe you would like to a little bit zoom in into this before we actually move again into the recovery metrics, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Races just aren't controlled. That there's so much that can happen in a race. And we were talking before we came on air, and Iñaki just had a race where it was like super cold for the swim, and he had to deal with some factors around that through the day. And the next race that you do might be super hot, and so you've got other factors that are going to impact your performance, and that's kind of neglecting the fact that a lot of athletes are basing how well they do based on who shows up, and where they rank within the field. So racing for the type of athletes that we're dealing with, there's just so much that can come into play that's not fitness related, and I completely agree. I think the only way that you really are able to get rid of all of those factors is to control them and to come up with some tests that are repeatable, that, things aren't going to change very much over the course of the test. And simple things like you said, doing an aerobic benchmark where you just have a particular heart rate, where you're going to execute at that heart rate, and you're going to see how your power changes over time. And you have a particular route that you do for that, or a particular, time of day that you do that, so that you're not dealing with all of those extraneous variables, and just tracking that over time and making sure that you're hitting that super compensation, that those numbers keep going up, over the long term, because we all reach a point where if you just keep doing the same load over and over and over again, fatigue accumulates and you start to plateau, right? And I think without that sort of testing, you don't see that. And so athletes who don't test are much less likely to take an off season, because they don't see that, my last few goes of this test have really started to hit a plateau, and even though I'm doing the work, I'm not seeing improvement from the work. So it might be time to take a little bit of downtime and recover. And I think in the absence of that, with racing, you can always come up with an excuse. You can say, it just wasn't, something didn't go right. I should have been able to hold this pack, and I didn't hold this pack, and so my race went to crap. Or, there's just too much that you can attribute to other factors than the fact that you just might be tired. You just might need to recover.
And it comes to my mind something that Justin there said recently about performance, and I completely agree. Is you do the preparation, you have an opportunity, and then you execute. And in order to really have performance on a race day, you need the three components, and it's very, very, very difficult. Like, I've done probably plus 200 races, and those three components to actually align in a race are a handful of them, right? So if we are chasing that season to see if we are improving, then it will be like a revolving door. You will get out of triathlon, going to cycling. Maybe I will take a season off, and then you will actually not be able to compound over time. So we also need to really differentiate regular testing from performance racing, and what are the implications on racing, because you can prepare, fantastic, which is part of the recovery, but then opportunity and execution kind of go to shit. Like, learning to race, the tactics of it, specifically, for example, in an Ironman, should I go with the fast group in the swim? Should I let them go? I go with the fast. Like, all that is strategic decisions that will have a huge impact in your finishing time, and can or can't be related to your actual preparation in terms of physical performance to the race. So it's actually counterproductive to test or to decide if your season, the year of work you put, it's good or bad based on the actual output of one race of that season, because you will keep coming to race. You will have more opportunities if you keep showing up, right? So I think it's head on. Now, Alan, measuring recovery. I know you are the data guy, and I think data is very important. I learned to measure HRV with you back in 2014, I think it was, when, it was not a thing, right? And I know there is many coaches and athletes that they don't fully believe the benefits of HRV. I think there is a lot of variances on the measurements, and you can get different readings in the same morning, for example, actually, if you do back-to-back readings. But I think if you pair HRV, which is hard data, together with the soft awareness of, like, how do I actually feel? What's feeling for me? Because when I ask athletes, how do you feel? And they tell me, I don't know, or okay, for me, that's a red flag. Because for me, when I ask the question, how do you feel, means how is your mood? How hungry you are in the morning, for example, or before going to bed, cortisol, right? And how do you feel, like, training today or not training? Like, you see your session and you're like, oh my God. And then you are thinking about drinking the coffee. Should I go? Should I not go? And you skip it and you leave it for the evening. And then in the evening, you are wandering around for half an hour if you should do it or not. Like, those are red flags. So I would like you to really tell me more, or tell us more. What are the actual metrics we should actually trust. Because again, there is so many devices right now. Whoop, we have Aura Ring, we have HRV for training. There's different metrics, ways of measuring with the limiting factors of the hardware together with the software, together with this is a huge industry and people is also making a lot of money by smoke and mirrors to the users. What are the metrics we should actually trust in a hard way and also in a soft way?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think it's. I've been really happy to see HRV measuring take off, and more people are talking about HRV, and more people are using, various wearables and various apps to keep track of their HRV. But at the same time, I think the whole science has kind of got dumbed down quite a lot, and you know, convenience is kind of trumping accuracy in a lot of instances. So when I get an athlete who has said, "Yeah, sure, I monitor my HRV," and then you talk to them, and monitoring HRV for them has just meant that they've been wearing their watch over the course of a night, and whatever it tells them their HRV is, that's what they're going with. It's kind of like, well, you're not really, you don't really have a good sense of your HRV. So it's big field, and I wrote, my last kind of Substack article on it. But if I had to kind of give the bullet points of what I would trust and how I would use that information, I think an athlete has to use a heart rate strap to get accurate HRV data. I think that's the most important thing, because with PPG measurements, which are basically getting the heart rate from light signals, there's so much potential light interference. And, depending on the wearable you're using, even if you're using a phone camera, for me, I don't know if I just don't have a steady hand or what, but my finger jiggles around a little bit on the phone camera, and I'm never getting a reliable reading from that method, and then
Probably it's because you are in ketosis constantly, Alan.
yeah,
Lack of sugar.
Now he's telling me I'm looking skinny, so he thinks I'm doing Atkins or something, but I'm not. I'm not.
No, sorry, I was just joking, man. Go ahead. Uh,
Uh, yeah, so that's the first thing. Wear a heart rate strap. Don't trust PPG. Don't trust what your watch is telling you if the data's not coming from a heart rate strap. So basically, your options there are, you've got various apps that you can use. HRV for training would be one. Cubios would be another one that you can pair to your heart rate strap to make sure that you get good data.
and a comment into this, Alan, because for me it's funny when I tell my athletes, guys, please, I always recommend Marco Altini app. I really like Marco and what he has built as a solopreneur. I think he's a fantastic athlete, coach, and engineer, and even entrepreneur. But I always tell them, use orthostatic measurement, 1 minute lying, 1 minute standing, and use the HR strap, please. The amount of like, no man, but I don't have time for this, like I'm like, oh my God, you don't have 2 minutes every morning before you. And then they come, no, I did it, but then I tested with the finger, and then I check out, and then they're trying to reverse engineer everything. And at the end, I'm like, okay, man, do whatever you want. Send me whatever HRV you want. I will just disregard this measurement, because for me as a coach, I cannot rely on that data.
No.
But there is a term in terms of consistency also, of like, it's with your scale. Your scale can be dumped, but if you always use the same scale at the same time after going to the bathroom every morning, it will give us some accuracy and some historical data that then later we can use to do assumptions and hypotheses. Because at the end, what we are trying to do as coaches, Alan, is to advise the athlete what we see based on what we see. What to do based on what we see, particularly in terms of holding them back, not pushing them more. That's, I think, 80% of our work is like actually putting the brakes on the athletes, right? But if they really don't want to do this the right way because of the marketing of the products, the easy of use of the hardwares and wearables, well, then it's going to be very limited, whatever the software is telling you to do, and it's not going to be as accurate. And I'm not saying it's 100% accurate using an orthostatic measurement, 1 minute lying, 1 minute standing. So, yeah, I just wanted to comment on this because that's part of the recovery, to assess the recovery. And if people is not willing to invest 2 minutes in the morning and they want to do it forced with the, wearable of their choice because it's more convenient, we are starting a little bit already to sabotage the idea of what recovery is about when it comes to the hard data. On top, maybe you want to comment on the softer data, on the feelings, which is sometimes harder for the athlete because it's harder to calibrate. It really takes time. It comes to my head maybe over the last 2 decades, maybe 10 athletes that I know they are like really good on sensing how well recovered they are. I was not one of them. Now I think I am, but it took me 20 years.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about this, Alan?
Yeah, I think, and related to a lot of the confusion around HRV measurement is the fact that a lot of the measures use RMSSD as their baseline. So that's one way of looking at heart rate variability that really puts a lot of emphasis on the strength of the body's recovery systems. So, obviously it's very important because we always want the body to be recovering well. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't really differentiate between the readiness to work and the readiness to recover. So you get a lot of athletes who'll say, I feel really tired, but my HRV is really high. And even if they're doing everything right in terms of the accuracy and everything, that could be very true because, again, when we see that the body's really switched on in terms of its recovery systems, oftentimes it's after we've done a lot of load. We'll do a big training camp and then we're just really tired and our body's doing what it should be doing. It's firing up the recovery systems to help us recover from that. So I think getting that sort of understanding of the difference between readiness to work and readiness to recover is a really helpful thing for athletes to sort of gel how they're feeling with what they're seeing from their data. And when you start looking at it like that, and maybe you look at some of these other metrics, like you can look at, for instance, the HFLF ratio, which is a good way of looking at parasympathetic versus sympathetic balance for athletes, and how their readiness to recover and their readiness to work are kind of balancing against each other at any one time. You start to get a much better tuned in sort of feeling, and it's like, well, that makes sense. I'm ready to recover. My HF markers are really strong, but my LF markers are really weak, so I'm not ready to work. So I think having that sort of two-dimensional way of looking at your metrics is really helpful, and thinking as well about how some of those subjective markers line up with that. Some of the things that you were talking about is I'm just not motivated. Of course you're ready to recover. Your body's like, just stay in bed. I'm giving you all this power to recover, but I'm not giving any power to work. And that's exactly how it manifests. I'm tired. I don't have the cortisol to throw out there and generate some good training. So I'm just gonna stay in bed and rest. And
And kind of the same happens also a little bit the opposite of what you just mentioned in the training camps, which I see constantly also with my athletes. We had a huge training camp early this year, and everyone was like, okay, let's keep the party going because everyone has like great HRV. And I'm like, no, guys, I was explaining exactly what you said. And I said the opposite when they are about to race, because since we cut volume tremendously, it's a big impact for the body. Even when we maintain intensity, you see sometimes the HRV moves in weird ways. There is not a perfect trend in the tapering for the athletes. So what I tell to my athletes is keep measuring, but disregard it. Because if not, it gets into their head, oh, I'm not fit because my HRV is totally destroyed and I'm going to race. It's like, no. It's okay. And it's the same. Let's be honest, Alan. When an athlete measures the HRV, even the orthostatic way, they wake up and they sit and it's like, oh, it's trash. I always tell them, go to what, let's assume it's a track workout, a hard track workout. If you slept okay or good enough, and there is no major concerns, go yourself to the training and do the warm-up. Assess how the warm-up is feeling. It's feeling okay? Okay, attempt the main set. Let's assume it's 10 times 800 meters at VO2 max or YASOS or whatever. You do the first rep and you ask yourself, is it supposed to feel this way? Attempt the second one. It's not the day. Try to cover the volume aerobically. It's not the day. Back off and just take the day off. And most likely we need to back off the load the next 2 or 3 days. But that requires the ability of the athlete to understand also that a training plan is just a plan. It doesn't guarantee any outcomes. It includes your input as a user of the plan and the feedback loop you have with a coach. And that's the real advantage of having a coach and not only following a training plan, because you can get into this conversation and really have someone completely outside of the equation of your brain and your body to add value into this.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on a really important point too. Whether it's a hard track session or racing, um, we want our readiness to work to be very fired up before a big race, right? So you get athletes who are excited for the race and who their sympathetic nervous system is kicked in and they're ready for a big event. And especially if it's a shorter race, that's a great thing, because we want that to be the case. We want them to be really mobilized. We want them to be ready for a big effort. And I think, again, looking at HRV just as in this one dimension of high is good, low is bad can be problematic there, because there are times that we really want sympathetic dominance and there are times that we want parasympathetic dominance. So it's important for the athlete to think about it more in terms of, okay, my fight or flight system is fired up right now. Is that a good thing? And is that something that I might want to mitigate some more after the session is done? So, maybe you have a great workout, but you're also thinking in your head, my HRV was kind of low today, so I'm going to go extra hard on recovery after this workout to try to boost that back up. And, thinking more in those sort of terms of like a seesaw versus high is good and low is bad.
And again, just for the self-assessment, and that's when HRV becomes secondary, because if you sleep like crap, it doesn't matter what your HRV is telling you. Like, you should take it easy that day, or easier. Again, I always tell my athletes, if you sleep terribly, no matter what the HRV is telling you, go and attempt the session, but most likely just cover the aerobic volume. So if it was a 2-hour interval ride with, threshold effort 10 times, 4 times 10 minutes, instead of trying to attempt that, and it's not a good idea because you had a 6-hour sleep and you normally get 8, go and do the 2 hours, see how you feel. And if you don't feel great, do a recovery 1 hour. And if you don't feel okay, just turn back and come back home and take it off. And again, contact me and let's take maybe an assessment of how you feel tomorrow. But this is what I call recovery on demand, right? And there is the other part also, Alan, but maybe we'll get into this of the art of the recovery weeks. But before getting into the recovery weeks and the actual, how we do this, I would like to tell you how I think about recovery strategies, because we talked about the data, we talk about the HRV, all these parameters, but I like to think about the 3 R's. I call them refill, reboot, and reconnect. So for refill is, for me, sleep and nutrition. For rebooting, it's all the nervous system resets that you just mentioned, right? Like how I can improve these HRV, like parasympathetic and sympathetic system. And the third component, it's a little bit more holistic, if you wish, like connection, reconnection. with yourself, with nature, with others, this social component that you see many elite athletes struggle with. Elite amateurs or elite professionals, right? So those are the three main parts that I consider fundamental of the recovery system. I'll repeat them. In the refilling part, nutrition and sleeping, that's huge. It's the battery of the body. The reboot, all these parasympathetic, sympathetic systems and how well we are reacting to those, and the reconnection, particularly with yourself, with nature, or with your emotional, even spiritual side, and the others. But Alan, I would really like to know your take on nervous systems, again connecting with HRV, and how much nutrition and sleep play into this, like pragmatically on HRV, and the quality. Because I asked you this question the other day on Twitter, like, yes, we need to sleep 8 hours, but how do we actually know those 8 hours were like real 8 hours of sleep and we really recover from them?
Yeah. I think you hit on some really important points there. The first one is that you need to both sleep well to actually recover from the training, and you need to eat well to recover from the training. But in order to sleep well and to eat well, your nervous system has to be in the right state. So when we're fired up, when our fight or flight system is going hell for leather and is really dominating things, our sleep, first of all, takes a hit, right? Even if we get to bed on time, we're restless. We don't have the same kind of, we don't fall asleep as quickly. We don't get into the same kind of sleep cycles in terms of the way the body kind of, cycles through the various levels of sleep to get to REM and kind of do its wave thing through the night. Those are disrupted if our sympathetic nervous system is overactive. And then with eating as well, and something that a lot of people don't think about, the parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest system, right? So in addition to helping us rest, it helps us digest food properly. And when your nervous system is all fired up, when your sympathetic nervous system is all fired up, you're not getting the same nutritional quality from the food that you eat, because your body just isn't in a spot to absorb the calories as well. So both of those things that you're talking about really come down to being able to flip that switch into a more of a parasympathetic mode. So I think it all kind of hinges on that. Right.
So Alan, I think you hit a great point there, because everyone is trying to sell you, the gurus, the industry, these sleep aids or these probiotics for the gut. And of course, it's very tempting to, like, the silver bullet approach. Oh, I will take these little drops of CBD, or like I will, buy these patches to sleep better, or I will, take this probiotic because my gut should be my gut. It can't be me. And then you forget about, like, maybe you have a big plate full of stress and you want to take more on top of that, and you think that the silver bullet approach will give you more space on the plate. And actually what you need to do is you need to take off parts of that stress from the plate and to be able to recover. One of the main I would say mistakes that I see a lot of amateurs doing, and this is where the pros are really, really good at, is in recovery weeks, amateurs are like, okay, I don't need to train that much. I'll keep the party going with the business, more maybe the traveling, I will put it that week, and then screw completely the recovery week. And what actually, like, pros and elite age groupers do is they really understand the importance of that recovery week, and they regenerate all that parasympathetic, sympathetic system to allow that sleep and nutrition to really be able to absorb. Also, another one, just quickly from the pragmatic side, recovery week, I'll be doing less, so I need to eat less. It depends. I would say big mistake, especially if you are an athlete doing high training load the previous week, and that you will do a lot of load after that recovery week. You need still to be consistent on the energy intake. Maybe you want to address a little bit on this, but this is from the pragmatic side, Alan.
Yeah. I think a lot of athletes playing catch up in their recovery weeks, and they're playing catch up on a few different things. They're playing catch up on work, like you said. They think the training's backed off, so I'm just going to go doubling down on work mode. And of course, work mode is usually about as sympathetic nervous system stress as you can get. They're sort of fired up, and they're not in the sort of state that you want to be in when you're trying to physically recover from the work. And also playing catch up in terms of nutrition, which is what they should be doing, because oftentimes when they're in these busier weeks, they're not keeping up with their nutrition. Something we talked about on the last couple of podcasts. So when you're not keeping up with your nutrition, while that's not ideal, you certainly don't want to be backing off even more during your recovery weeks. You want to make sure that if you do
I
need to
mean,
catch up,
kind of happens the same in the off-season period. Like athletes go like two routes. Like this is the typical two routes I see. Okay, off season, I will eat all the junk food I didn't eat during the season, and I will gain ice cream, pizza, like all this, like even booze, like I'll go hard on the beer, the alcohol, and then I will be okay. It's my cleanse diet. It's my binging period. Like completely stupid idea. The other one I see a lot, it's kind of on the opposite side. It's like, okay, it's time to cut weight. Like now that I'm not doing anything. No, it's the anabolic phase. It's where you actually need to gain a little bit of weight in order for you to be able to lose something when the work is going to be done. And those two are like major ones for me in the off season. That in the smaller cycles of like the recovery between the week cycles, I think it's very, very important to contextualize them into the block of the recovery. It's less evident than in the off season, but it's kind of the same, just spread it across the year, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think we were talking about that on the nutrition side too, where a lot of athletes, over the course of their week, when they do these big training days, they find it hard to eat enough. So during the recovery days, they actually have to continue catching up from what they didn't do on their big days, and it's a similar sort of principle.
And kind of like also in experience, even sport nutritionists, and that they are very well formed in the academia but have little practice on the ground. That's one of the primary mistakes I detect. They will send on the recovery days not enough food. And that's when I know they are not experienced. I've seen this several times with some of the athletes, even with professionals. When I see that, it's like, you need to talk to your nutritionist or change the nutritionist, because this is not the right approach. Recovery days, you need the sleeping, you need the nutrition. Recovery weeks, the same. Recovery periods after the season can be different from athlete to athlete, but generally speaking, it's an anabolic phase. You want to gain in order later to lose gradually over the season while doing the work, naturally, just by doing the work without forcing things too much.
Exactly.
But also another thing is, it's more on the psychological side, Alan, and I'm sure you have struggled a lot over your decades as a coach, even as an athlete. Kind of when I talk about recovery, or I like to also call them deloading, because now that I call them recovery, is like immediately pushback. No, I am feeling great. I don't need this. I know it's a deloading. Okay, it sounds more scientific. It's a little bit of marketing on my end. So the deload week, the athletes think it's punishment, and they really don't understand it's a reset phase. So they come back hungrier. And normally the first pushback I get is like, no, I feel great. I don't need this. What I actually need is movement. I still need to do things. But if we don't, you had a great article on this in your like old website, where it's like, it's a very basic principle. If you don't lose fitness, you will not be able to produce fitness. This is actually the graph that we are trying to do over the entire season. And it's very evident season to season. If you don't take that off season, you will collapse 2 years down the road, or 3 or 4. It's like just a matter of time, because you still keep carrying that CTL. Maybe it's trending up, but your ATL and TSV are not where they are supposed to be if you are into those metrics and you really use them. maybe you want to go a little bit into this, Alan, and also what's actually happening physiologically when you do the deloading or the recovery, right? In the week, in the, let's say, in the season, and also in the off season. It's a lot what I'm asking, but maybe you can handle it.
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point there that recovery occurs over different time frames for different systems, right? And one of the most important systems is the neuroendocrine system. So the recovery of hormones, the recovery of your body's responsiveness to things like cortisol, to your stress hormones. These sorts of types of fatigue are very small, but they last a very long time. So it's something that the athlete doesn't necessarily notice is accumulating, but if you don't take those longer unloads at the end of the year, you carry across this neuroendocrine fatigue from season to season. And what happens is the body isn't as responsive to cortisol, right? So when your brain sends a message, we're going to need to liberate some energy here, we've got this work to do, over time, your body is like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of doing this work. I'm kind of tired of liberating that energy for this work, and you keep doing that time over year after year without an unload, and eventually your body is just like, I'm not going to respond to that, and that's where we get into things like overtraining with athletes, where they just haven't taken those longer recovery periods, and so they're at a point where their bodies are like, I'm tired, I need to rest, I'm not ready to generate any sort of energy for work right now. And, those sorts of things take a long time to accumulate, but they also take a long time to set right. So it's really important to be proactive and not allow that to happen, and the way we do that is making sure that we insert these longer recovery periods within the block when they're needed.
And what about in the actual, you are talking about the recovery blocks when they are needed. Let's assume it's during the season. But what happens actually in the off season? Because I see many athletes jumping right back. They take like basically 2 weeks off and they're like full training mode. Let's assume they race Ironman World Championships. Normally, if you get to Ironman World Championships once, you can commit this mistake. If you've been in World Championships several times, you will not do this because you know the reality. But first, maybe second time you get to World Championships and you are like super motivated because you had a kind of crappy races most do when they go to their first Kona or their first World Championship, because it's just a lot of like new things going on, the tactics and so on. Really, the best ones in the world at age group level and professionals are there. So then you don't have maybe the best race, and you are super motivated after the collapse because you don't have the race that you have and that you wished. And then you are like, okay, I'll just take 1 or 2 weeks off. I really need to improve my swimming, so I will do a huge block of swimming. I feel I need to do some gym work, and suddenly you are like back on full training modes 2-3 weeks after, and it's like it's not even November, and you are already training for a goal that you need to qualify again, and it's gonna happen like 1 year from now. Like, how much that makes sense, Alan? Like on the periodization and recovery, equation.
Yeah, and you feel fine at that point, right? Like the
Yeah,
initial sort of
because
acute,
there is still a peak of fitness.
yeah, you're feeling good. The acute fatigue has passed. You're like, yeah, I can do this. I don't have to ditch that much fitness after all, And then it's kind of it's like that Simpsons episode where Homer jumps the gorge, and he's like, yes, I'm gonna make it. I'm looking great, and then all of a sudden, just
Collapse.
just drops. And that's exactly what happens. You get kind of mid to late season and the athlete's just not responding like they did last season, So they're going to go into their next Kona without the fitness that they had from the last one just because they didn't time it right. They didn't take that deload when they should have.
I'll tell you a strategy that I also know you use. I actually learned this strategy from a Russian coach, Nicola Romanov, and he was using the middle season breaks a lot. And I think that's a great insurance policy for the coach and the athlete, especially with highly motivated athletes, because it really like puts the brakes on not peaking too soon, and particularly if the athlete, because sometimes you take the athlete after the season and you can't really assess how good or bad is, the metrics, the recovery. You really need to buy that insurance also as a coach to make sure that the build towards the A race is going to be done right, and he will not get sick. He will not peak like 2 months or 3 months before the main event. So that middle season break, which is like a mini off season, it's a big recovery period. It's not like a block recovery period. In the middle of the season, like having two basically off seasons in one season, it's a great strategy. And I know that you have implemented that basically with all your athletes, and it works really, really well. So maybe just to round a little bit more the recovery on this macro cycle, you want to finish with this, and then we move to the other point.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is a really good way to structure the season, where you have sort of a mid-season peak where it's not an A peak, it's sort of a B race peak. And oftentimes it might be a slightly shorter event than what the athlete's A race is, so it's kind of a preparatory event where you can sort of test out some strategies and things like that. But beyond giving us a chance to sort of practice racing, it also gives us an excuse to rest, so you do a half Ironman or something that's still hard, but not quite as, not quite as fatiguing as a full Ironman. And, that just gives you an excuse to take a couple of weeks off. Maybe you time it with a period where you're going on vacation with the family or something like that, in the middle of summer. And then you get back and you're ready to hit that sort of big block, but before the Ironman. And I think that's a really powerful strategy for making sure that when you're in that big push phase where you're doing the hardest work for the Ironman, you have the energy and you haven't done what we were talking about earlier, where you're just carrying that fatigue across, and by the time you get to that really important block, you sort of blah, your body's not really ready to do the work and ready to respond to the work.
Yeah, and just a comment on this, because I got challenged recently by one of my colleagues. He's not my athlete, because he saw me like training, basically moving in the forest the other day, and he said, "Oh man, you just did an Ironman literally 18 days ago. What are you doing here? You preach differently." And I explained him what I'm doing, and I also explained him I pretend to do an early season camp with elite athletes, probably 3 to 4 weeks, as I did this year in Gran Canaria in Spain. And before that, I want to be fully recovered. So I will take kind of like a winter break, which is kind of a deloading phase before hitting the camp. So because my next race, which will be Ironman in France next year, will be kind of early in the summer. And I start to explain basically and he's like, "Oh, that's very smart. I never thought about this. I was building my season, basically like with reverse periodization, training for a sprint in the winter, short, then building for an Olympic, then 70.3, and then race Ironman," which is kind of the old approach, non-stop, like 9 months of full training. Can work for some, but I think eventually that can also break you. It's less chances for breaking you, and to stay consistent with that approach of the mid-season break and placing it strategically around training camps, winter time when you will go with the family, summer holidays, Holy Week for some of the guys that will go like spring break. Like, just choose your season the most you can. We are not professionals. We can choose the races we go to, right? So place them strategically instead of forcing. One of the things, for example, that my wife told me this time is like, amazing that you are back in triathlon, but never again, please put later in the summer your racing, because then you spend the entire summer like training your ass, because the kids has no school. We just watch you, wait you in the house. You come back here a little bit destroyed, and then we just kind of shuffle with you. Let's do it the other way around. You get destroyed before the start of the summer, and then you shuffle with us in the off season in summer. And I'm like, that's a great idea. I was kind of thinking about this in the mid-season break, but never did it because I was coming from elite racing in the middle of the actual season of racing, which is July, August, September, which is what I will do next year. So again, find your way, find your system. These two mini breaks in the season work well, and you need to let go fitness in order to gain fitness. Alan, shifting gears,
Absolutely.
not I don't want to get too much into nutrition because we got that really deep into the podcast with Mateusz, which is the previous one. But we rarely talk about the mental side here. I would really like to understand from your point of view this emotionally cooked feeling that many feel, this mental fatigue that it's real, and it's often hitting before the physical signs show up. What is the obviously there is a hormonal component that overlaps with this, but what's the mental side as well? When you start to detect as an individual these signs because they actually don't show up with the data, what should we be looking at? Where should we be placing the attention? When we see what, we should do what? In the more soft side, psychological side of things, emotional side of things.
Yeah, I think something you said before really hit home, and that is motivation is a huge indicator, you know, and most of the people that are listening to this podcast probably on an ordinary day when they're in a good state, they have no problem with motivation, right? They enjoy getting out there, they enjoy the training. So when you have those days where you're just not feeling motivated, you should really pay attention to that. And a lot of athletes see that as, well, this is the time that I've really got to toughen up and I've got to read my Goggins book
David Goggins style.
and just push through. These are the important days to push through. And I think that's complete nonsense. That the days that are weird, that you're like, I really don't feel like doing it today, they're the days that you stay in bed. They're the days that you're in that state where your body's like, I want to recover. I'm not ready for work. I'm in a good spot to recover. And if you push through that, then you take it out of that recovery state. You know, you take it out of the ability to actually respond well to the training. You know, so I think motivation is a really key indicator to pay attention to. And other than that, things like just general fatigue. So when you go out and do a session, you know, usually you see your heart rate increase at a certain rate, and sometimes you'll see it's really slow, it's really laggy. And sometimes that can look really good, right? Because you're like, I'm pushing 250 watts and my heart rate's only 120. This is great, you know, but you should really pay attention to those sort of signs of how much effort am I actually putting out at 120 BPM, you know, and does that sort of relate to how I usually feel at those efforts. So yeah, I think mood, motivation, fatigue, those are really the key factors to look at. And
Just, I will interrupt you for a second because you mentioned mood, which is kind of like the hormonal side of things as well. And I tie it a lot with levels of hunger in the two extremes. If you don't get hungry at all, red alert. If you are craving all the time, which happens always after Ironman, and it can happen for several weeks, like you're having these massive meals back to back to back, that's not healthy. That's not normal. Like you should pay attention. Something is going on. Maybe you need that fueling. You need to do it, but it's a sign of like do that, but back off. So connect the emotion of like, okay, I'm kind of binging on food. Maybe I need this, but I don't need more training. I really need to wind off. And that can happen in off season or during the season as well. Kind of connected just with a pragmatic approach on like how it feels sometimes that, or like night cravings of like you already had dinner and it's like, I'm not hungry, but I want to eat ice cream. Like, why? Something is going on there.
yeah, and you know that I think sometimes when you push a little bit too far towards the need to recover, it almost it becomes a sort of depression, you know, because you've taken the body to the point where you're so like tired and so, you know, kind of in that state that you're like, I'm not getting what I need from just regular movement every day. I'm not getting those feel good sort of hormones. You know, I think that's something to be really careful of in how deep you dig a hole, even if your body's in a good spot to respond to that, and it is in a good spot to be able to shut you down. if your body shuts you down too hard, sometimes it can really kind of mess with your head, and put you in a position where you're just not psychologically in a good place, and that's when a lot of those bad things start. You might eat more, you might take to drinking, you might do those things that you don't normally do.
And I will tell you something because, like all these athletes in social media, like the elites that are, like basically preaching a lot of things, they don't show that dark side. And I've been with those guys, with many of those guys. I've been one of those guys. And that dark side of what's going on, they don't mention it in social media. They don't mention it in YouTube. And it's what we are talking about. And it has a mental health component. And that's the thin line between when performance and health start to go sideways. So we as amateurs, we really need to be conscious about this because our life doesn't depend on this. Maybe few of the pros, not all of them, but I will not judge any pro or anyone because I'm not no one to judge. I'm judging myself based on my experiences. There is a dark side to this that nobody or few really talk about. And that nutritional component, the relationship component, the sex component, the libido component, all those components are part of being a human. The connecting component also. Maybe you are introvert and you gain energy by being alone. Maybe you are extrovert and you gain energy by being around people. Maybe you are more balanced. When you, because you are your only judge, see that what you normally do is not giving you that energy, something is off and you really, really, really need to reassess and either talk to your psychologist, talk to your coach, but don't stay in your head, in your own head because it's not going to be healthy. So that's very important in the recovery system. You need input from someone else always. There will be no time that you can do it all by yourself. There is hundreds of examples in books, YouTube videos, and any coach that has coached for long enough will tell you everyone has hit a dip at some point in their career, as an amateur or as an elite. The important side is not to repeat the mistakes you already experienced, and ideally, don't experience mistakes you don't need to experience, right? Like recently Lionel Sanders breaking a bone because he was in energy deficit for such a long time. Like you need to listen to our podcast and realize that that's not the way of training, right? Um, Maybe closing a little bit on this because it's been a long podcast, Alan. The framework of recovery, we have micro, meso, and macro cycles. So for the micro, I would say daily, sleeping, fueling, wind downs, whatever that means for you, reading, being with the family, like shuffling, walking in nature. Mesocycles, the weekly rhythms. Monday, recovery day, many do this. These 2 days are recovery days, like a scheduled recovery, unless you are really, really like conscious and your coach will accompany you in these like on-demand recovery phases in the mesocycle. And in the macro cycle, the offloads, right? These two, ideally two, maybe at least one proper off season to really do these big offloads. But how you could add to this recovery system, is it obviously is not incidental, is not accidental. It has to be intentional. How would you challenge the listener on approaching this, Alan, to start closing the conversation of today?
Yeah, I think ties in a lot with what we were talking about before, where you never want to take fatigue to the level that it starts to negatively affect both your training and your life. So when you have these little mini breaks along the way where you consciously deload, you consciously switch the body into recovery mode, and these can go all the way down to mini breaks within your workday, so you're working on this project, and you feel that you're at your desk and you feel yourself tightening up, and you need to just take a mini break where you flip your parasympathetic system back on, you go for a walk, you chill out, you kind of get rid of some of that stress so that you'll be able to keep working and you're not going to dig a hole for yourself. And I think that applies on all levels. As you said, we've got Um, Within the day, you want to do that before you sleep. You want to be able to flip the switch so that you can be in parasympathetic mode when you eat your dinner, when you sleep, so that you recover well for the training. Over the course of the week, after your big days, you don't want to carry that "I'm fired up, I can crush the world" state across to your recovery days. You want to be able to flip the switch and do what's needed so that your body recovers well. And then, as we said, on the longer cycles, you want to make sure that you're not starting things back too soon. You're not kind of pushing yourself beyond the point where you can have a period of the year where you're in that anabolic mode, where you're building things up, you're allowing growth to happen, so that you have the reserves that you need when you're doing the hardest training.
I would challenge the listener on my end just to really build a system that works for them. They can grab ideas of what we said. Ideally, get a coach. That's the real benefit of having a coach, the recovery side of things, which is it's 50-50. You need to do the work and you need to recover from the work. If you don't recover, you don't get the adaptations, you don't progress, you eventually collapse. It's not about following a training plan. You need to be consistent also with training, which is the other discipline, as we mentioned at the beginning, and really build a system on the three layers, like on the micro, on the meso, and on the macro cycle, and stick to it. If 3 weeks of loading and 1 week of deloading works well for you, and do it. If you want to go with HRB and adapt even on a daily basis and don't think about it, do it. But build a system you can trust, that it's individualized for you, and have someone that is not you influencing that system, or eventually you will fuck it up. And that fuck up will cost you sometimes many seasons, not only one. So that will be on my end, the last word.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think recovery in the sort of Western world, it doesn't get the respect that it deserves. And, I think honestly, a lot of people just have lost the ability to switch into a deep recovery mode. That they're just, we're on our phones all the time. We've always got some sort of stimulus going on that's keeping us fired up. And there's so much to gain on all levels, both athletic and your greater life, by just practicing recovering. Like you said, practicing like you would your training sessions. Practice recovery. Practice whatever gets you in that chilled, relaxed state where you can feel that your body is winding down and is doing what it needs to respond to the training and get better.
Maybe you shouldn't be listening to this podcast in your recovery walk or your day off. Let's start with that. So next time you go for your walk or your yoga or your mobility, turn off all devices and focus on yourself. It's boring as shit, but eventually it's like training. Boring will become your new standard, and it's good, especially in training the recovery side of things. So was a good one, this one, Alan.
Absolutely, man. I think in terms of what needs to be reminded, this is it, and I know myself when I do take the time, like you said, I've got into this habit now where I'll get up from the desk and I'll go walk on the trails that are around my house, and I won't take my phone, I won't take music, I'll just go for a walk, and it's amazing the difference in state between, you might have just had like a bit of conflict on a call with an athlete or something, and you're all fired up, and then you go out and you do that, and you get back, and your whole nervous system is in a different state. And I think, the more of that sort of stuff that you can fit into your life, as an athlete and a human, the better your life is going to be.
Yeah, just last one. As a matter of fact, the phone, it's a big one. I keep coming back, like I erase Strava from the phone, and Twitter, and then eventually I need to get back on it because I have too many things, and then it's a content struggle. But I really want to commit to like completely erase all apps. And this is my promise to myself. I'm still dealing with what system I will follow. I haven't come to a conclusion. I gave myself September, which is this month, to come up with a system that allows me not to look into the phone, into any channel except WhatsApp, which I use for my work, email sometimes, and the phone, but no anything else. So that's my public challenge. I challenge you also to like start small. That's a huge one for me. I attempted this many times, but every time I do it, my quality and my perception of quality of life increases. So it's something I need to do. It's just like I got myself into the wrong equation many years ago, but I will get out of it. I'm working on it.
I'm the same with Twitter. I've been doing that as well. I'll delete it, and then occasionally I'll lapse. I'm like an addict, and I'll be like, I'll reinstall it just because I've got this tweet in my head that I really want to type, and then I'll do it, and then I'll be like, I shouldn't have done that. So then I'm back on the wagon, But yeah, it's a struggle, but I think we're making positive steps by heading in that direction.
We are all humans, so
That's
well,
right.
anyhow, was a good one, Alan. Thank you guys and gals for listening to the Mad Science Meets Real Life podcast, and see you on the next one. The next one will be a surprise, but will be amazing. I promise you.
Yep, we're gonna keep the theme rolling.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.